Tonight, Angela Rayner tells Labour MPs, "I know you feel disheartened and bruised." The Deputy Prime Minister has been speaking to backbenchers after their huge revolt last week over welfare reforms. She's also told them we must learn from this, and we will. We'll be live in Parliament for the latest. After last week's U-turn on welfare savings, the Chancellor is under pressure to put up taxes in some form. We'll talk you through the signals we're getting from Number 10 on whether or not there's going to be a wealth tax. There's speculation that if Labour backbenchers are going to cause problems for Keir Starmer again, it will be on special educational needs. I'll be speaking to the Children's Minister to find out where the government stands on the issue. Also tonight, the Prime Minister joins commemorations to mark 20 years on since the 7/7 terror attacks in London. Plus a powerful interview with the Lib Dem MP Josh Babarinde, who's decided to speak out about the abuse he suffered as a child and why he wants the law on domestic abuse to be changed. And on the eve of Emmanuel Macron's three-day state visit to the UK, we'll look back at previous times the red carpet's been rolled out for the French president. Our guests of honour tonight, Tim Montgomery and Christine Jardine, who'll be with us for the next hour. I can't promise a state banquet, guys. If you behave, there might be some crisps and peanuts. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, after U-turns on winter fuel and disability benefits, the government has another battle with its backbenchers looming, this time over help for children with additional needs. The Times has quoted one MP saying if they thought taking money away from disabled adults was bad, watch what happens when they try the same with disabled kids. But look, this is a difficult argument to make, but there is a case for reforming the system, just like there is with welfare. But in both cases, saving money can't be the starting point. It's got to be about following the evidence and making sure the support goes to those most in need. So firstly, let's just listen to the Education Minister, Stephen Morgan, earlier today.
I mean, I'm not going to get into specifics today, but it's absolutely right that we work really hard to reform the system to make sure it works for every child. We want to make sure there's good quality, inclusive mainstream education available for all children. That's what our focus is on delivering.
Well, look, we can tell from that change is coming. So let's look at the evidence now, shall we? So there are currently more than 600,000 education, health and care plans, or EHCPs. That's a number that's gone up 10% in the last year, and it's led to the IFS saying the cost is now unsustainable. But here's the reform argument, because when it comes to EHCPs, not everyone is equal. If you come from a disadvantaged background, you are less likely to have one. Research from LSE shows 4.75% of children on free school meals in the most deprived areas have an EHCP, compared to 5.75% in the most affluent areas. If you go to a private school, you're more likely to receive SEND support, 22.4% of pupils compared to 15.6% in state schools. And you're more likely to get extra time in exams as well. 42% of children at private schools get extra time in exams compared to 26.5% in state secondaries. Now, that's a big difference. And of course, remember, if a private school is named in an EHCP, local authorities then have to fund that placement. So you have got to ask, is the extra support going to the kids who need it the most, or the parents and schools most able to navigate the system? Getting this right is so important. And I know there'll be lots of worried families tonight, lots of worried parents tonight who rely on EHCPs. But there are also parents who are drowning as they try and navigate the system. And there are children who are still not getting the support that they need. So there is space for reform here, but it's got to be genuine reform, driven by need, not by money. It can't be about balancing the books on some of the most vulnerable children. And if the government takes a bit more time to work that out, well, perhaps that is one thing that they have learned from the disability benefit row. We'll get more on what signals we've been getting from the government on wealth taxes and also SEND reform with our political correspondent, Rob Powell, in a moment. But in the last hour, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, has been speaking at a meeting of Labour backbenchers over in Parliament. Our political correspondent, Liz Bates, was outside listening at the door. She joins us now. Liz, what does she have to say?
Yes, Sophie. So this is a regular meeting of Labour MPs that takes place in Parliament, and it is always a good indicator of the mood of the Labour Party, and it's always interesting to see who is going to speak and what about. Now, of course, we are coming off the back of a very difficult week for the Labour Party. A lot of Labour MPs feeling down in the dumps, particularly as it is on the anniversary of the general election. I think many of them feel that they are not where they should be. Well, Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, was, if you like, rolled out tonight in front of the PLP to try to build bridges back to Labour MPs, to get them back on side, to try to restore a bit of discipline into the party. And the way she approached it, very interesting. As you say, we do listen at the door, but we also get a good indication from MPs who are sitting inside. They tell us what's going on, basically. And what she said was, first of all, she said she acknowledged that MPs feel disheartened and bruised. She said we must learn from this, and we will. So a pretty straightforward acknowledgement there that things are not where she would like them to be. She also said, I hear you when you say it's not the policy, it's the process. And that, of course, is a reference to the welfare bill and all the different iterations that it went through last week, and the total breakdown in communication between the upper echelons of the Labour Party and their MPs, which led to them facing which led to the biggest moment of indiscipline, facing a huge rebellion. Quite interesting as well that Rachel Reeves, a very tough week for her. We saw tears in the House of Commons last week. She came into the PLP today. She didn't speak. She came in with her sister Ellie Reeves, I think, for a bit of moral support. She sat next to the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner. Angela Rayner almost providing a kind of human shield for the Chancellor in front of her own MPs today. She went out. She left looking a bit glum, and of course, what she has in her mind is the difficulties that she has already faced and the huge challenges going forward. So I think it shows you, this PLP, this meeting of Labour MPs tonight, I should also say, not particularly well attended, and they were sort of drifting in and out. So it gives you an indication of the atmosphere here among Labour MPs. And I think it was quite clear when the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor walked out that they still feel that they have a real mountain to climb.
Oh, really interesting stuff, particularly, of course, the fact that Rachel Reeves was sat there with her as well. Liz, thank you very much indeed. Liz Bates there, listening at the door, but also, of course, messaging the MPs in the room to give you that inside track on what is going on in the Labour Party. Right, let's talk now, shall we, to our political correspondent, Rob Powell, who is here with us now. Rob, there's so much to unpack today, it feels. You know, there's been a bit of discussion around wealth taxes, how likely that is, but I just wanted to start on the special educational needs as well, because it feels like there's more kind of rumblings from Labour benches there as well.
I think people, backbenchers, are seeing what happened with welfare and potentially seeing maybe another pattern play out. Now, that's maybe not completely fair to an extent. I think there are similarities, but there are differences as well. The danger, the political danger, I think, is the same, though. At the top of the programme, you talked about how, it needs to be driven by need rather than necessarily cost. The danger is, though, when you look at the amount that is being spent on special educational needs provision, local councils say, this could be existential for them, essentially. This could be something that, if it keeps growing in terms of the amount being spent, not only on state special schools and provision there, but also on putting people who can't get that provision in state schools, councils paying for them to go to private schools, and then the transportation on top of it as well. So the costs are not sustainable there either, but you're right that if this is being driven by cost cutting, or at least if it
has the appearance
of being driven by cost cutting, then you do end up in, I think, the same problem. You have the same political problem with the public, but also with the MPs that you did with welfare. But this is potentially where this idea of a wealth tax suggested by Neil Kinnock potentially comes into play.
Because this is the thing, isn't it? If we do have these Labour MPs who are worried about whether it is special needs for children, whether it is disability benefits, about cutting to save money, then of course we've got to start thinking about taxation. Where are we up to on wealth tax?
So this was suggested obviously yesterday by Lord Kinnock. It's something that's been floating around on the left of the party for a while. And sort of our job, the job of political journalists in the lobby briefing first of the week this morning, was to try and establish exactly what Number 10's thinking on this is. Now, you've sat in plenty of those briefings.
Yeah,
sometimes
I'm a bit impenetrable.
Sometimes the person comes armed with something, the spokesperson comes armed with something to say, some news to create. Often, though, what you have to try and do is sort of read between the lines. See if you can pick out those kind of nuggets, those steers, those nods that indicate whether people at the top of government are saying, no, this ain't going to happen, or it might happen. So what I wanted to do was put up a couple of the things that the Prime Minister's spokesperson told us today and see what you think, because to be honest, I ended up a little bit confused, if I'm being honest with you, Sophie. So we asked if the Prime Minister was in favour of a wealth tax, and this is what he said. We have repeatedly said that those with the broadest shoulders carry the greatest burden, and the choices we've made reflect that, including closing loopholes in the non-dom tax regime, increasing air passenger duty on private jets, and then... There we go. Our progressive tax system means the top 1% of taxpayers contribute nearly a third of income tax, with revenue from wealth and asset taxes going towards funding tens of billions of pounds for public services. Now, when I heard that, I don't know what you think, I thought, it's like they're leaving the door open on that one.
Game on.
Yeah, exactly. The other way to interpret it, I guess, is, well, they pay enough already. Why should we put more on them? So we said, look, does this mean this sounds like you're leaving the door open? And this is what the spokesperson said to that inquiry. The Chancellor has said that we're not going to be bringing in a wealth tax. Now, that was pointing back to public statements the Chancellor made back in April, before all of these U-turns. I heard that and thought, oh, game off.
Yeah, game off, yeah.
It's sort of a classic lobby way of killing a story without commenting on it, point back to something else that someone has said. The problem is the spokesperson didn't really row in behind it then. You know, if they're going to kill the story, you'd expect them to kind of keep talking about that quote, keep saying the Chancellor has laid out the position. But he didn't. So we ended up, none the wiser, 3 dozen journalists trooped out all saying, well, I guess we'll probably just write a story that says that they haven't ruled it out. My take on all of it is that it's swilling around there somewhere. It's maybe not formally in the mix as a suggestion. It's been given legs by Neil Kinnock suggesting it yesterday. It could raise money, although economists doubt how much it would raise, because people with lots of assets also have big brain lawyers that know how to bluntly keep those assets away from the taxman. But it could help raising some money, but it could also help telling this story, shifting the narrative from balancing the books on the back of pensioners, people with disabilities, children with disabilities, to we're balancing it on the back of the richest and we're reforming these areas.
That's it, helping with the narrative is so important, isn't it? Rob, thank you very much indeed. Well, Rob and the rest of the lobby are trying to work out what it means when it comes to wealth tax. I actually asked the Education Minister, Catherine McKinnell, about wealth taxes as well, although, like Rob, I'll be honest, I wasn't completely sure what the answer meant or where it ended up, but we did start off talking, of course, about the education policy. Let's have a listen. Thank you very much for being on the programme. It's great to have you. So you were planning to open up 1,000 family hubs across the country. Just explain what the idea is.
As a government, we're absolutely determined to give every child the best start in life. And so we want to make sure that across a whole range of measures, we are improving support and outcomes for children. But the Best Start Family Hubs really are a key part of that, just to make sure that every community has that hub that parents can go to for support, that children can obviously receive all the nurturing input and support that's available. So we're putting the investment in, and that's alongside making sure we have more expansion of childcare and really quality early years, expansion of the workforce, and also investing in a lot of the interventions that we know children need. I mean, the big thing we want to tackle is that children are school ready when they start school, because we know that that gap that appears when a child starts school in terms of their attainment just doesn't close when they get to 16 and leave school. So we know we've got to get in early, and we've got to get in with that support that we know will make a difference.
The other thing that I do want to talk to you about as well is something that is causing quite a lot of concern, I think it's fair to say, among some Labour MPs, and that's reforms to special educational needs. So in particular, the EHCPs, so effectively the support plans that are put in place if a child is seen to have additional needs. Are you considering scrapping those? So
ideally, we are focused on reforming the whole system. So I'm not going to get into the mechanics of one particular aspect of the current system.
It's quite an important aspect, though.
Well,
this is why I'm asking a bit, because look, you know and I know there have been an awful lot of parents out there who'll be really, really anxious about this. So that it's a big part of it, isn't it?
So I think for those children that have special educational needs at the moment in our system, there are a large number of them, and some have EHCPs, some don't. what we want to focus on is making sure that all children have their needs met within the school system. And that's why we are investing in the high needs funding. We're investing in the capital so that schools can expand their capacity for taking and supporting children with special educational needs. We're investing in early speech and language support. We're investing in training for teachers to recognise neurodiversity and differences in learning. So we're reforming the whole system.
Can I ask about these reforms? Do you think we have a situation at the minute where, I'm trying to work out the right way of phrasing this, but middle-class parents and some schools are better at navigating the system than others, and so it's not necessarily done on the needs of the child, but on how good their advocates are? So I'm looking, for example, at evidence saying that children in the most affluent areas are more likely to have an EHCP compared to those on free school meals in the least deprived areas. I'm looking at, for example, Ofquer research showing that 42% of children in private schools get extra time in exams compared to 26.5% in state secondaries. Are some private schools, I guess, working the system?
So we want to make sure that every child gets a better start in life,
We know that's true.
And which is why we are targeting our resources at those areas that we know have less resource and are more socio-economically deprived. That's part of our early years strategy, because we know that that's how you give children the best start in life.
I'm asking
when it comes to the SEND system,
yeah.
when it comes to the special educational needs system, we know that children present with a whole range of needs within the school system. That's why we moved special educational needs and disabilities into the schools group within the Department for Education. It's in my brief as School Standards Minister. That's a big change from the previous government. They had parked this issue in the too difficult pile somewhere else. So we've brought it into the heart of the education system. And we want to make sure that all children have their needs met,
if there's any...
whatever they are.
So I think this is quite important, because if you look at the disability reforms, right, that you run into issues with, there are lots of people who thought that reform was needed, but you didn't go out there and make the argument. If you believe that you're going to have to look at the special educational needs system, you're going to have to take difficult decisions on it, and potentially, get rid of ECHPs, and you've got to go out and make the argument, right? So do you believe that middle-class kids are more likely to get this additional needs than people who might have bigger needs?
So children and families have been left in a system where they've had to fight for their child's education, and that has to change. So fundamentally, we want to reform the system. What that new system looks like, we are still considering. We are listening, we are taking feedback, we're meeting with colleagues, we're meeting with experts, we're meeting with stakeholders in the system.
Kids being failed by the system.
I'm meeting children and families as well about what the system currently means for them, whether it's met their needs, whether it hasn't, whether they have an EHCP or whether they don't. I think whether a child has an EHCP or not has not necessarily fixed the situation for that child or that family. For some, it's really important for them, which is why I understand the anxiety at the moment. So basically, we just need to reform the system. We are looking at it, we are listening, we are making sure that every child has their needs met at the earliest stage possible, which is why we're so focused on early years. But we recognise that we need to invest at every stage of the school system to meet the needs of children and make sure that there's a system that doesn't leave this adversarial approach as the backstop.
A big part of the backdrop to all of these arguments is the fiscal situation. Of course, we know this. We've seen it before. Neil Kinnock, your party's former leader, told Sky News you should look at introducing a wealth tax. Do you agree with him?
So, I mean, these are decisions for the Chancellor, and I know the Chancellor
you must have a view,
is working very hard. It's not for me to anticipate or preempt what the Chancellor might decide in terms of tax policy.
Do you like the idea of wealth?
I think we have an awful lot of taxes in our system currently that do tax wealth and assets. And I think we need to get the balance right to make sure that we get the income that we need to make sure the country is thriving, and that, that we have a fair tax system and a just tax system. But fundamentally, we need to get the economy to grow. And I know that's what the Chancellor is incredibly focused on. But
do you think the balance is right then? But also, you talked there about the balance between...
Unlock opportunity in our, which is what the Department for Education is very focused on. And, you mentioned the best start in life. We mentioned the children with special educational needs. Fundamentally, we need to make sure that whatever your background, whatever your circumstances, the opportunity for you to unlock your opportunity and growth in the economy has to be tapped into.
We've spoken a lot about that, but I'm
on.
still not clear on your... Do you think the balance is right now when it comes to wealth taxes?
I mean, I think those are decisions for the Chancellor. So I'm not going to get involved in discussing and setting tax policy on this in this chat with you. But I appreciate the interest.
I tried, Rob. I'm not sure.
I don't know if you had more or less luck than the lobby briefing.
I think it was less, I'll be honest. I think you got more at the lobby briefing. But there we go. Rob's still with us. We can also bring in our duo of the evening.
I'm not sure the interest was appreciated, actually.
Yeah, maybe that's fair. Tim Montgomery, formerly of Conservative Home, now a member of Reform UK, and the Liberal Democrat MP and spokesperson Christine Jardine as well. Christine, what do you think of wealth taxes?
Well, they haven't worked elsewhere in the world. They're very complicated. You're taxing everything from wine to government bonds. They all behave differently. And in the OECD, you had 38 countries and the 12, I think it was in the 90s, had wealth taxes, and it's gone down to 4, simply because they don't work. They're not successful. And what you really need to do, and it's the one point where I agree with Catherine, what you really need to do is grow the economy. And there are other areas you could tax. We've been saying since before the general election, increase the digital tax so that the richest people like Jeff Bezos are paying more tax. And we're getting tax out of the digital giants, the Mark Zuckerbergers, all of them. That's a better way of doing it, I think, than this complicated wealth tax system which nobody likes and doesn't work.
Tim, what do you think?
Agreeing too much already.
Oh, already.
No. The thing is, we're having a live experiment. Every generation, seemingly in British history, needs to relearn that if you put taxes beyond a certain level, the wealth creators, the people that also create jobs, they start to leave the country. In the 1970s, the decade that was probably formative for bringing Margaret Thatcher to power, we lost so many of our most talented people by overtaxing. Of course, when the NHS is under pressure, when so many public services are under pressure, you want to bring as many resources as possible into the system. But if you start to kill the goose that lays the golden egg by sending wealth creators abroad, you know, no one benefits from that at all. No one benefits. And people now, they have the richest people, they have expensive accountants, they have the best advisors, they can move their money abroad. So when we start pursuing the wealthy, we don't get what we hope and think we will get. We actually often lose them completely. And who suffers most from that? The NHS, the welfare state, the public services that we depend on. So it's a nice idea, and I understand why Labour backbenchers want it. But my worry is that we're now going to enter what economists call a doom loop, where we start putting more and more taxes on business, on wealth creators, in order to make up for the deficit in the public finances. And as we put up more taxes, actually we suffer more problems with wealth creators leaving, and we get into a dangerous cycle.
It's interesting, isn't it? We've got the sort of tax arguments on the one hand. We were also, of course, Rob, exploring the changes to SEND provision. It's pretty clear from that interview that there's going to be some kind of reform, but maybe they're still working it out.
Yeah, they're saying there's going to be... They're not at the stage yet, they're saying, where they're actually putting forward proposals. They're emphasising heavily that they are talking to parents, talking to teachers, talking to MPs as well. So I think, I think they are trying to learn the lessons of the welfare debacle. I think you can see the direction it's going in, though, right? Like, they do want fewer EHCPs to be used and there to be more provision within mainstream schools at an earlier level, an earlier stage. But then that just depends on whether the money is there for that early intervention. Because if that isn't there and you're not catching those people early, all you're really doing is, I guess, taking away EHCP certificates from people who feel that that's the only way they could get help in the first place.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think you're right. That's where my ear is pricking up as well when they're talking about more in mainstream settings, as in more money for schools, in the state sector to do it. What's your take on all of this?
I think the idea of being more inclusive and making more mainstream facilities available for children with special educational needs is a good thing. The system does need reformed. It's not working. It's becoming clumsy, over-expensive. People aren't getting the support they need. But you have to reform it the right way, and I don't think it sounds as if the government know what the right way is. And they're in a situation now where everybody doubts that they will stick to what they're saying. Yeah. We went through this with the welfare cuts, and actually on Thursday, when Wes Streeting introduced the Fit for the Future health plan, Ed Arger said to him, well, we hope this one sticks. What we actually need, regardless of politics, if we put politics aside, what the country needs is for the government actually to have a clear, defined plan and stick to it and get the economy going again. Because getting the economy going, getting the growth we're talking about, will provide the money to improve the system for welfare benefits and for SEND. It will do that. But at the moment, it just sounds as if they're thrashing about saying, oh, we're listening to people, but we don't really know how to fix it.
I think this is the problem, is where Labour is now. I study politics very closely. I know where Ed Davey stands on most of the big issues. I certainly know where Nigel Farage stands. I know where Kemi Badenoch. I don't know where our Prime Minister stands. I honestly do not really know what energises Keir Starmer. And I think Labour backbenchers, they've smelt this, they can sense this, and now what they are doing is thinking it's not just difficult for them to rebel, it's not just like something naughty. I think some of them are beginning to think it's our obligation to help set an agenda for this government. That's a very dangerous place for a Labour government to be in when the backbenchers think they need to take control. And I thought you did, I'm not casting aspersions on your allegiance or anything, but you did. You presented the facts at the top of this programme about what was happening with these certificates. I haven't heard a government minister or a Secretary of State be as clear as that. And that's what Labour needs to start doing. If they're going to make a case for something, make the case. Use social media. Say what you're going to do, because people at the moment are seeing an agenda that's led by the Treasury, that's about cuts, and they're not seeing the case for reform. And you need to persuade the public. I think the British people are reasonable. If they hear a case, they'll listen to it. But where's the case?
Really interesting to chat. Thanks both very much indeed. Thank you, Rob, as well, for bringing us up to speed on all that too. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, we'll see what happened as the Prime Minister joined families and survivors to remember those who died in 7th of July terrorist attacks in London 20 years ago. Stay with us.
I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Hello, welcome back. Well, today marks 20 years since the July the 7th bombings in London, where 52 people were killed. 4 suicide bombers targeted the capital's rush hour in one of the worst ever terror attacks on British soil. It's impossible to forget the number 30 bus with the top ripped off, or those explosions underground shattering those tube carriages. Well, our crime correspondent Martin Brunt, who reported on the events at the time, has this.
Philip Beer. Anna Brandt.
Remembering the 52 who died in the London bombings.
Kieran Cassidy.
And 1,000 petals for each of them.
Rochelle Chong Foyen.
For survivor Thelma Stober and Saba Edwards, who lost her mother, intoning the names wasn't easy.
Michaela Otto.
Fiona Stevenson.
Among the congregation were victims' families, emergency service workers and survivors, their scars not always obvious.
We come to honour the memory of those who died, to stand alongside the survivors, to give thanks for those who responded with courage and compassion.
It's 20 years to the day, 7/7, since Islamic extremists detonated suicide bombs on 3 tube trains and a bus. Each site of the 4 attacks was represented by a candle, carried to the altar by emergency responders. There was no mention of the bombers' hatred and division. Instead, a celebration of each site's history and diversity.
A statue of Mahatma Gandhi looks out across Tavistock Square and echoes the campaign for peace and non-violent resistance. No wonder then that Tavistock Square is sometimes called the Garden of Peace.
And where people of faith can work together.
A mix of faith leaders called for mutual respect and understanding among communities.
We pledge ourselves to work together to make this goal an enduring reality.
The service was what all memorials aspire to be: powerful, moving, sad and uplifting.
The message we want to send today to anybody thinking about future cowardly acts of terrorism is: you will not defeat us. You will not cower us. We will not forget those whose lives were cut short.
Later, the Prince of Wales paid tribute to the victims at a second service, held in the 7/7 Memorial Gardens in Hyde Park. Martin Brunt, Sky News.
Well, let's talk again, shall we, to Tim and Christine. It's hard to really believe it was 20 years ago, because it's a day that I, like I'm sure so many other Londoners, remember so clearly. And the scale of the attack and the number of people who died and the impact it had on London, it's just, you just can't really forget it, Tim.
No. And just to say, we were just watching those images from St Paul's. That's beautifully done. And you cracking up a little bit myself now. It's, hearing as the names were read, but it was beautifully done, and remembering the people we've lost and the people who have survived, rather than thinking about what was tried to be done to us. I think the balance, that we don't always get things right in this country, but I think we've got today right. Very good. But it was an extraordinary moment. I remember I just formed the Centre for Social Justice with Ian Duncan Smith, and we were having a sort of a gathering of young volunteers that day, and we were celebrating what had happened the day before. The awarding of the Olympics to London, and there was real fear. That was the thing, real fear, because we did not know whether this was the beginning of something. It was a bit like 9/11. Yeah. You look back in history, you think, well, they were isolated events. That's not what people thought at the time. No. At the time, we thought, our lives are about to change in fundamental and continuous ways. And thank God they didn't.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true.
No, as Tim was saying, the day before, everybody had been celebrating. And I just remember we were planning to go on holiday. We were getting ready to go on holiday. My daughter was 9, and all she was talking about was the Olympics. And she'd seen Kelly Holmes, celebrating in Trafalgar Square. And then the complete contrast the next day. I was thinking about it coming in the tube this morning. It was a day like today. It was a beautiful summer's day. And you remember where you were. It's one of those moments you remember where you were, what you were doing, and it doesn't seem like 20 years. It just seems almost like yesterday that it happened. And I think, you know, you're right. I think we all did worry that this was going to be the start of something, and it coincided, if I remember rightly, with bombings in Spain on the train.
On the trains, yeah.
And there was this feeling, what's coming next? And the other image that sticks with me is watching the news that night of Londoners walking home because there was no public transport. And even Rudolph Giuliani said at the time, Rudy Giuliani said, this is amazing. These people are just saying, right, that's fine, we'll just walk home.
Yeah.
It was...
And I could just say, thank God it hasn't happened again, but it's not through want of trying for some people. And, you know, our security services, we often hear about, or we tend to hear when they fail, they've averted a lot of what they call late-stage plots as well. So, you know, thank God we have been safe, but we can't afford to relax our guard either. There are still people in this world who want to injure us and hurt us. And, you know, we need to continue to invest in those services that keep us safe.
And also your point as well, you know, it has made me think a lot as well, after listening to you say that, about how they failed, right? You know, the tube I was on today was packed. You know, they failed, and that is something we do have to cling on to as well. Thanks both very much indeed. Well, of course, today's anniversary commemorations are sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the columnist and broadcaster Steve Richards and the former Conservative Special Advisor Sam Shah. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Like treading on eggshells, the MP Josh Babarinde shares his own experience of abuse as a child. We'll bring you the full, powerful interview. That's next. Hello, welcome back. Now, this next interview is with an MP, but it's definitely different to most interviews you'll hear with parliamentarians. We're about to hear Ali Fortescue speaking to Josh Babarinde. Now, he's the Lib Dem MP for Eastbourne, and he's been talking about the emotional and physical abuse he suffered when he was a child. Now, Josh was only 4 when the abuse started. It was at the hands of his mother's former boyfriend. He was scared, and he says he felt like he was treading on eggshells, and that he was only safe when he was at school. I'm very aware that there might be people watching this who would relate to Josh's story. And look, it's you really that he's speaking to. So let's listen to Josh Babarinde and his interview with Ali Fortescue.
At home, it was over a number of years. I remember being, upstairs in my room, in bed, crying myself to sleep under my covers, hearing shouts, hearing screams, hearing things smash. And I didn't know if my mum was okay when I could hear all of this stuff going on downstairs, when I could hear those shouts and those screams, when I went downstairs the following morning and saw broken glasses or saw our Hoover kicked in once. And there was it was hard. It was really hard at home, and I was hit a lot at home by the perpetrator as well, and it was like treading on eggshells, trying to make sure that through the way that you acted, or through your inaction, or through a look that you gave, or particular words that you used, didn't rock the boat, that weren't misinterpreted. And so that made me really hyper-vigilant from a super young age, and that is what domestic abuse is. It's when other people's behaviour in that way is so coercive that it erodes at your very personhood. Too many people experience that today, and I've experienced it myself, and so has my family.
It's just so hard to imagine what that's like as a young child. At home, that's a place that you're meant to feel safe. Is that something you can ever get over?
I definitely knew that it wasn't right. It wasn't what a child should experience. It wasn't what any family should experience. But that was our reality for some time. And I should say, it wasn't the case that every single day there was awful trauma, but that time was really, for me, defined in so many ways by those key moments and by that environment that felt hostile, that felt constricting, and felt as though it clipped our wings at home.
When you look back now, how do you feel about that little boy that was getting through that?
I feel really sad for him. He was such a good lad. I was known as a smiley kid at school. You look at all my school photos, biggest smile you could imagine. And I was just trying my best, and I was, finding my way in the world. And it's sad that kid, me, was subject to what I was, and that my mum was subject to what she was as well. She deserved way better. But I look back and I feel really proud of the resilience of that kid. Over the weekend, I was going through some old boxes, and I found a diary from that time, and there was, huge innocence in that diary, in that childhood of, I was a massive Star Wars fan, still am to an extent, and there were lots of, Star Wars, drawings and all that kind of stuff in there. But then I came across, an entry that I'd written to myself back at that time, describing what, I was going through, what I was feeling at that time, and feeling as though I was going to get hurt if I didn't act in the right way. And it really struck me seeing, the pencil that was written in, and literally having not read it since probably I wrote it that day. So I feel sad, but I feel proud of how resilient That little kid was. My mum was. And proud that we've got through it.
Do you mind me asking what you wrote?
It was an entry describing how I'd been asked to go and use the toilet. And so I did, and I was in there with my diary, and I wrote about how I couldn't go. And I wrote in the diary, I've just been sent here, I'm really going to try and go, but I can't. Oh my goodness, I'm going to be in so much trouble. I'm going to get smacked so hard. And then there was an entry 5 minutes afterwards where I said, 5 minutes on, I still haven't done anything. I'm going to be in so much trouble. And he's going to tell my teacher. And he said, I remember, it took me back to that moment, he said that he would tell my teacher if I didn't do what he wanted me to do. And that was mortifying. And I just felt so helpless. And that is, speaks to the darkness of abuse, where no matter what you do, you can't do the right thing. And an abuser takes away your dignity, as he did in that case for me. An abuser takes away your sense of self-worth. And an abuser makes you feel anxious about even the smallest things, like going to the toilet. And no child should ever have to experience that. And part of the reason I'm campaigning is because I want to make sure that no kid has to go through what I've had to go through.
Did you tell anyone at the time about any of this?
No.
Why not?
I was scared. Obviously, my mum was at home and she knew some of the things that were going on, but there are other things that she did not know were going on. And so I was scared, what would happen if I shared, beyond. This was a violent person who I had seen and heard be violent at home. So that there was just no way I was going to cross that line. And to be honest, I had committed for very many years after that I would never speak about this. But through having some great friends, through accessing therapy in adulthood and the rest, found it much easier to engage with some of this stuff, to reckon with it, to come to terms with it, to accept that these experiences, whether I've liked them or not, and I did not like them, have shaped me, and to take that and see what I can do with that. And a key mission of mine has been to fight for those victims and survivors across the country, those who have maybe got out of the situations that they're in but still require support, but also those many people who are still in those situations or who might find themselves in them in the future. You often cannot see this kind of abuse coming.
And what is it that you want from the government?
Well, a key thing I want from the government is proper recognition of domestic abuse crimes in the law. And there's a real problem where we saw the government enact its STS 40 early release scheme, which saw lots of ex-offenders released 40% into their sentence rather than 50% into their sentence. And what the government promised there is that they would exclude domestic abusers from being released early under this scheme. And I think that's so important. It's so important because victims and survivors of abuse need to prepare for when their abuser is back on the streets. And there are many victims and survivors who decide that they might need to move house or move their kids to a new school, shop in different places. All of these kind of things are so important. And so that's why that commitment the government made was so important. But what I learned, what the country learned, what victims and survivors learned, is that actually those domestic abusers, they were being released early anyway under this scheme. They were slipping through the net. And the reason is because the government has no formal way to categorise domestic abusers currently. It doesn't know how many domestic abusers are in prison at this present moment. I asked them that question head on. They said, word for word almost, it is currently not possible to robustly calculate the number of domestic abusers in prison. Once we have this specific categorisation, the exclusion could take place from an early release scheme if a government so wished, but also we would know how many domestic abusers there are in prison, etc., etc.
Have you had any assurances on this from the government, publicly or privately?
Well, the promising news is that after months and months of campaigning for this specific categorisation, working alongside incredible organisations like Women's Aid, like Refuge, like Victim Support, Mankind, working with survivors and victims, working with academics, lawyers, the government has said that yes, as a result of that campaign, we're going to introduce a specific categorisation.
So they've said they're going to do it?
They've said they're going to do it. Not a specific offence, but instead, when someone is sentenced for a particular crime, ABH, say, that there will be a categorisation that happens there. But the assurance that I need from the government, that I so far have not got in the House of Commons, is that a government, one, could in theory use that to exclude domestic abusers from an early release scheme, and two, that this government will use that identifier to exclude them from early release. That is what I'm pushing for now. That is the commitment that I need to see, and that's the commitment that victims and survivors across our country deserve.
Incredibly powerful, moving interview there with Josh Babarinde. He said he was a good lad, and he certainly, has done extremely well and spoken out as well, of course, about what he experienced when he was a boy. And if you have been affected by that story, you can contact the Samaritans at any time on 116 123 or email joe@samaritans.org. Still to come on the Politics Hub. On the eve of French President Emmanuel Macron's historic state visit, we'll take a look back at his other trips to the UK, some more successful than others. Stay with us.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin. All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy?
It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat. It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island. The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre. The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin. Jerry, any comment on the judge's decisions? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end, of a 52-day trial. Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris. Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County. The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found. If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland. Sky News, get the full story first.
What might happen if Russia attacked the UK?
This is clearly an enormous show of force. It is definitely out of the ordinary.
We ran a war game with former ministers back in the hot seat.
Ben Wallace.
Amber Rudd.
Jack Straw.
It's the kind of war game that's genuinely tested inside government.
The Russians are signalling that there may be an attack.
Russia knows our weaknesses, but do you? I'm Deborah Haynes. From Sky News and Tortoise, this is The War Game. Listen wherever you get your podcast.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, get your French flags at the ready because Emmanuel Macron is going to be in the UK for a historic state 3-day visit starting tomorrow. He'll be hosted by King Charles, who's also going to be meeting with the PM. But fair to say, there's been a few other visits in the past, so we thought we'd just have a look back at some of the other occasions he's been here with a few different leaders as well. So those COVID elbow bumps, I just can't. Thank goodness we're not doing those anymore. It makes you realise how many PMs we've had as well, right?
Yep. I hadn't realised he'd been here on quite as many visits in the past few years. But I'm going to see him tomorrow. He's addressing Parliament, so I'm looking forward to that.
Lucky you.
I forgot to pick up my ticket, though, so I'll have to go and get it on the way back.
I saw the French police, bayoneting the boats crossing the other day.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's a coincidence that they were doing it just ahead of this visit.
Oh, you're such a cynic,
I'm
aren't
a
you?
very cynic. I think we shouldn't be giving him a state visit just to make a political point until we've actually, we're getting value for money for the French. For the amount of money we spend on them to stop the boats, and they're flowing faster than ever. So I'm afraid this visit has come at the wrong time for me.
We do need to rebuild our economic relationship.
We do.
There you go.
He's the key to that.
We needed a bit of disagreement from
We did.
We've delivered.
Fair
We've
enough.
delivered.
Thanks both very much indeed, Christine and Tim. There. That's all from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Nat Parvet presenting.